All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have a old Google colleague, Chris Vander Mey. We were both in the Kirkland office, golly, a long time ago. It's getting up there. It's like 18 years ago or something like that.
Man, yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, but around that time, we had our first kid, my wife and I, and now that kid is a junior in high school. So there you go.
Crazy. Crazy.
Well, welcome to the show, Chris. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's really great that you're doing this. And, I hope everybody gets a lot of value out of these Fireside PM podcasts. I certainly have been enjoying them. It's great.
I love them. They're fun. And I get to reconnect with old colleagues and people do such interesting things. So maybe we could just start with a little bit of your background and your journey along the way, and then we're going to focus on the main topic of controllable inputs, which I think is a super cool one. But we can start with who is Chris Vander Mey?
Yeah, well, thank you. So I came up as an engineer. My undergraduate is in engineering, and I did a couple of startups, and then I went to Dartmouth and got a master's in engineering management. And I came out to Seattle, where you and I were for a little while there, to work for Amazon. I was a dev manager at Amazon back in the day. I went to Google and I did about 6 years as a product leader at Google. And that's where you and I worked together. And I worked on things like Google Meet. I helped build the very first version of that, and a number of things for Sundar and the client world. I went and I left Google and I wrote a book. I wrote this book, Shipping Greatness, which you can buy on Amazon, about how to build and launch great software. Because I felt like, we were all inventing it as we went along and nobody was really teaching it. Yeah. And so that's been good to sort of meet people that I've seen use that book. I spent a couple of years at Meta building product there, and I was responsible for building the voice and video features in Messenger and the main app. And then I went to Amazon and I ran engineering and product organizations there, sort of as a general manager for about 7 years. In the ad space, I was responsible for reporting and campaign management. Did a short stint with a group called Upstart, which is a machine learning driven lending company. And now I'm running a company called productpartner.ai, which is an AI product manager. Will help make anyone a good product manager, and will make a good product manager a brilliant product manager. And so if you want to try that, you can sign up for that, productpartner.ai. And happy to talk more about AI and that sort of stuff too. But that's sort of how I got here. I've been through a bunch of these sort of FANG companies and seen a lot of different things, and it's been a great journey.
I was just on a call this morning with a Googler who has been at the company for a long time. And we were remarking about how, the company has gone through many chapters and eras of development. And I was curious, having spent time at Google, Meta, and Amazon, what do you think were some of the biggest kind of cultural or differences in terms of how they ran as a company?
It's such an we could probably spend all day talking about this, but and obviously this is totally going to depend. This is just my perspective, right? And everybody's going to have a different experience based on what group you work in and things like that. But what I felt in the days that I was at Google, which was earlier, it was very much an engineering driven culture, and it really wanted to be very bottoms up. And that's what Larry and Sergey wanted, and that's what Eric wanted. That made the PM very much a peer with the engineers, and you would sort of stand alongside and drive together. And the dev managers, the goal was for them to have so many directs that they couldn't really do a lot. 25 directs. What do you do? So that was one thing. And then when you go to Facebook, it was a little different, where the PM was more of an ideas person, less involved in the tactical execution. And the way that you communicated things was much more social. It was a lot of, it was deck based and sort of primitive deck based, because there's a strong desire to move forward and hack and to try things. And when you have over 1 billion users, which is what it was when I was there, you can experiment super rapidly on just tiny little pieces of the population, and that changes the dynamic a little bit for you as a product leader. Design also, when I was in the group I was in, design had a strong voice. That is it was in the growth organization working on Messenger, and there were some smart folks there, and then that helped change the dynamic a little bit. The role that design plays in the product world can change, and when you have a great design leader, when I worked on Meet, I got to work with Jake Knapp, who did really good work, and so that made it a meaningful conversation there. And then Amazon, it's a lot more product led in terms of how decisions happen. And it's a lot more formal in terms of how you're documenting things and writing it down. I felt like when I was at Meta, very little was written down, and I hope nobody's over there takes offense at that. It's the goal is to move fast, and so like maybe you didn't spend as much time. This is all just relative, right? I'm not saying it's good or bad, but at Amazon, there's a strong writing culture, and being precise in your writing and being thorough in your writing was seen as a way of making better decisions and moving faster longer term. So those are some core differences. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it totally does. You mentioned something at Meta where you have so many users, you can run experiments very easily, and that changes the product leader's role. Can you share a little more about how that impacted things?
Yeah, I mean, and I think everybody has a little different perspective on this, but my perspective was that when I was at Amazon running a monolithic stack, when this was like 04, 05, people that have been around there might have heard of Garupa, which was like the replacement for Obidos and these old things, you had to get it right because it was really hard to make changes. It took a long time to get them out to production. And so you had to do a lot of testing. You had to be pretty confident. When you have a massive amount of users and a good experimentation system, you can try little things and little bits of people. And that's also the nature of the software. If you're running a banking system, your ability to experiment is much more limited, right? Or when I was at Upstart running, it was a VP Engine Upstart, there's a lot of compliance stuff you have to think about. You have to be very careful about what you're doing, and you have to go through a bunch of steps, and that's all there for a good reason. But it changes your approach. It's not just like, oh, I'll tweak the language here. It's different.
Yeah, totally. So because Facebook had access to so much data and it wasn't a enterprise critical product, at least the main product wasn't.
Yep.
That allowed you to run more experiments, and you could do it without, kind of rebuilding the whole product over and over.
Yeah.
Does that, what I hear then is the product leader's judgment may not be as crucial, because wouldn't the team just say like, well, let's, if we don't agree, let's just run an experiment and see what happens?
I don't know about, I certainly think that is a core part of the philosophy there, right? Yeah. And if I was to say, Amazon is a leadership principle that's all right a lot.
Yeah.
And Meta says move fast and break things. I think that kind of sums it up in a way, right? Move fast and break things is, well, we'll try it and we'll see. All right a lot is, let's think this through, make sure we've got the right amount of data, and not spend too long at a decision, but think it through a little bit more carefully. And and I think that manifests in the product leader's role. And for those that are not at those companies, I think the thing I would take away from it is look at your product and identify where can you move really rapidly and where are the high risk areas, right? What's going to break a user's workflow? What's going to break what they're doing? And then, don't mess with that without being thoughtful. And then for other things you can try, I think Facebook is probably the most successful company I know when it comes to growth. I think that group there under Javi and Alex Schultz and, Naomi, they really helped grow that company from small to 2 billion users. And they did that by doing very rapid experimentation on things that were more growth focused.
Yeah. You summarized Facebook as go fast and break things, and Amazon is be right often.
R right a lot is the leader.
R right a lot.
The guy who says, move fast and break things.
Yeah.
And Bezos was the guy who said, our leaders are right a lot.
Okay.
Not all the time, but a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you summarize what your impression was of the Google kind of product philosophy?
I think, and I don't know whether it was Larry or Sergey,
Yeah.
but one of them had this strong perspective, which was sort of a why not perspective, a do the harder thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a brilliant idea, which is, in the canonical example is Gmail. When Gmail came out, we were all sitting there with Outlook and we had like 100 megabytes and you had to constantly throw away all your email and you couldn't find stuff. And, Google said, well, why can't you just have everything? It's expensive. Why not? You can't search all this stuff. Why not put it all in memory? So BigQuery, which is very successful, and back in the day was Dremel and was amazing. You probably bumped into this, Tom, right? It was this amazing way of looking through the huge amounts of logs by just putting everything in memory. And so by saying, well, why not? I think they unlocked a tremendous amount of power. And, so when I worked on Google Photos Screensaver, which was this little side project that Sundar asked me to work on, I brought it in to Larry and Sergey and Eric in a product review, and I showed the product before we were going to launch it, and they were like, "How much CPU is this using?" I think it was with Sergey. He said, "It's like, seems like a lot," because we were just doing it all on the CPU, and you could hear the fans going, and it was like not a great idea to do this. Sergey was like, "I don't think so. Why can't you just do it in GPU?" We were like, "Well, it's going to be a lot more work, and it's like, why not?" So we took it back and we did it, and it was good. It was a harder thing to do. It was a bigger investment, but we did it sort of the better way because it was better for the user. And I think that was meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one common and related thread that comes to mind, especially early Google, was always the product review where the reviewer would say, like, can you think a little bigger?
Sure.
Can you, why can't this be an even bigger deal?
Yeah.
And, I think it kind of touches on some of that spirit that you were mentioning as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's really, what does the user really need?
Yeah.
And that's sort of, and I think all companies that are successful are able to really get down to what does that user really need? That's the customer obsession piece. And that's what a product leader does well, teases apart to get to that critical inflection point.
Chris, you wrote this paper about controllable inputs, and it wasn't a term that I've heard a lot. And I'm curious, about the genesis of how you got excited about this framework and how it helped you, and then
I'm so excited to talk about this. This is an Amazon thing, so I did not invent this, right? This is a deep Amazon thing. This is a Bezos thing. I think he invented it, or at least the S team clearly worked on it. That's the senior VPs there, and Bezos has talked about this. And I think this is one of, along with customer obsession and working backwards, the idea of like writing down, and starting from the customer problem backwards. This is one of the more powerful things that Bezos and the leadership team helped bring forward. And I used it a lot at Amazon, and I carried it forward into my other roles. I carried it forward in my startup, into Upstart when I was there. So I think to talk about them, I think the first thing is to talk about, like, why would you use a controllable input? Like, what is the problem? And then we'll talk about what they are. The problem is, as a product leader, you need to know when you're having an impact. That makes sense. Certainly when I was at Facebook, Meta, it was all about impact. You got paid more if you had more impact. So you really needed to know that you were having an impact. You need to know where the business is going. If you're running a business, you need to know, is your product getting better? Are your users happier? So how are you going to know that you're doing better? Third, you need to guide your team into investing in the right area. As a product leader, you're helping guide an organization, whether it's one engineer or 1,000. You need to help them move the right way autonomously, because you want to get the most out of them. So how do you guide them? There's a lot of ways to do that. Well, this is one. And then fourth, you need to communicate with leaders succinctly. These are all core things that we have to do as product leaders, right? Measure how we're having an impact, know how the business is doing, get our team going in the right direction, and then communicate all that. Controllable inputs do that. What a controllable input is a metric that measures the business impact of the changes that you make. So let me walk you through this because it'll be a little bit more clear. So one of the canonical examples, and I remember hearing this way back in the day from Kim Rockmiller, who was VP at Amazon and a tremendous leader, is the Frito-Lay example. So Frito-Lay was trying to figure out, when do they restock their shelves? They would go in, the delivery people would go into the store, and they would put more chips or more, like bags of Fritos on the shelf. And they needed, the ideal case was that they didn't run out of chips, right? Because, then they wouldn't sell the chips. But if they put too many chips on the shelf, they would have stale chips. They would have to take them back, and that was a loss. Mm-hmm. So how would they measure this? What's the right way to do it? In order to measure this, they had to come up with a way that was cheap to measure, accurate, and what they ended up doing was saying, let's measure the number of stale chips to figure out what the efficiency is of the restocking. Mm. And so if they got to 0 stale chips, that was not going to work, because maybe they had missed opportunity. Yeah. If they had 1,000 stale chips, well, they had clearly overstocked. So by measuring stales and driving it to 1, it was going to cost them 1 bag of chips. If in a perfect case, it was going to cost them 1 bag of chips. But the rest of the time, they had a really good measure of what their stock level was. So they came up with an innovative and measurable way of knowing what their stock level was. This is an example of controllable input. They can control that number, that business metric, by changing how they stock. Stock more, the sales goes up. Stock less, sales goes down, and goes into a defect case where it's 0. So that's an input to the business, because with the right amount of chips, you get more sales. And it's one that you directly control. Control input is a metric that you directly control that matters to the business.
Yeah, that's a great example, because I could see how if you use a traditional metric like chip sales per week,
dollars,
it could technically be going up, but you wouldn't realize you were leaving all this money on the table because you were running out.
That's right.
Or you were overstocking and you're, spending all this money on inventory you had to throw away or mark down.
Yeah. When you're thinking about controllable inputs, Tom, you can find a lot of examples in very successful industries. So another one is revenue per 1,000 opportunities in the ad space. So I worked in ads for a while, and I particularly like and this is called RPOM. I particularly like this metric because you can control RPOM, and it captures a lot of the value of the business. What RPOM is it's the revenue that you get for every opportunity. So on a given web page, you go to ESPN.com, there's a whole bunch of slots. Each one of those slots is an opportunity. When you load it to go look at the Kansas City Chiefs, you've got your one impression across those. So maybe you pull like 10 opportunities. If you click on one of them, you're going to generate sales of that ad, right? A cost per click sale. And that goes into that. So if you pay $10 for that and there's 10 opportunities, your revenue per opportunity is 1. Because you had $10 across 10 opportunities. The reason why this metric is so nice, and you divide it by thousands because it's ads, the reason this metric is so nice is that it tells you how relevant your ads are because of the clicks, right? It tells you the competitiveness of the bidding because of the price, right? It's the revenue there. It tells you it tells you the and by doing that, it controls for basically the saturation of the page, because if there's a lot of ads right on that page, you don't really know, and you were just looking at total revenue, they'd be able to game it on the supply side, right? So you've got a metric that you can control very directly by saying, I've built a robust auction with highly relevant content. And that's good for, your business and for the clicker, you, Tom, who's like looking at Redskin, Washington Commanders ads or whatever, right? So this is a metric that you can control by adjusting relevance, by coming up with better creative, by different user experience. So by controlling it, you get movement.
Chris, did that revenue include the revenue that Amazon would make from selling stuff on the assuming it was like a
no, but I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't theoretically do that. I think what's interesting about this, and when you think about controllable inputs, is what is the business? So as a product leader, what is the business you're responsible for? What is the piece that you move? Do you have to capture the entire value chain, like the lifetime value of the customer? You could, But
Hmm.
that is more abstract. And if you go back to, am I trying to lead my team? And is it going to be fast? And this is sort of where we can talk about like what makes a good controllable input.
Yeah.
You need something that's as closely connected to the top line business input. So revenue. Okay, that's good. So is it closely connected to the top line business inputs? Yeah, it's gonna talk about dollars, but it doesn't necessarily have to go all the way out to like share price. There are companies, and Bezos talks about this, right? There are companies that will try to like grow their share price and do it by stock buyback, right? But that's pretty remote and it's not customer focused, right? If you're looking at, say, RPOM, you're like, okay, it's driven by clicks, and that's clearly the shopper or the browser cares about that, and that's good. It's directly connected there, and it connects back to the business.
Makes a ton of sense. When you think about teams that have tried to use controllable inputs for the first time, can you share like an example where, it was an okay metric, but it wasn't really that good? Like, what does a bad controllable input metric look like?
Bad controllable inputs, that's a great question. Bad controllable inputs tend to be things that are more like what Eric Ries wrote about in the Lean Startup, which are vanity metrics. So numbers that go up and to the right, but they do that because of things either that you don't necessarily control or other factors. So let's say, you and I are working on a UI project, right? We're trying to make our system more usable. These actually tend to be really hard. Because like this is actually that's probably the hardest case, I think, for controllable inputs. If we were to look at user growth, okay, then that would we impact that? Probably somewhat, because if we build a great UI and people are like, hey, you should try this, it's beautiful, right? That'll help it grow. But in reality, it's driven a lot more by like whether the job got done for the user, by upstream marketing spend, right? So it's not isolated to what you're doing. If you're responsible for a feature, though, and I saw this work really well at Meta, retention becomes actually a good sort of first level cut, which is you've got a user that comes in and touches your feature. Do they come back again, like within 90 days and used again, or whatever the appropriate window is for you? Retention tends to follow a curve. So you pick a slice of that and you say, is the user still using it, right? So is it sticky? Is it valuable? This is a top level metric that if you own the feature, you can use it. Now, that doesn't work in some cases where you have like one-time use features, right? Like if you were into it and you were trying to measure, does my tax form uploading make people happy? That's actually really hard to measure with retention because it happens once a year, right? It works, it doesn't. So you have to come up with a different approach there. So what people tend to do in some of these cases is you try to look at satisfaction metrics for like the UI. So like sometimes you'll look at net promoter score or things of that nature. Those are suboptimal as well because you have to do them based on studies. And ideally you want something that's live. You want something that's real time. Because you want to be able to see, I made a change. I see engagement, right? So generally, when you're looking at a UI, for example, you would look at something like engagement and repeat engagement with a feature, which is similar to retention. And that can be powerful. And there's a lot of technique around how to use retention. And then when you find people that drop off from your feature, by looking at a metric like retention, it helps you identify who you want to go back to and talk to again and say, oh, by the way, you left. Why? Here's a change. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And the reference to the vanity metrics brings back memories when I was a startup founder. We used to report to our investors number of users. And I think in retrospect, we were able to grow that number through a lot of paid marketing.
Sure.
That kind of masked the core kind of limitations of the platform, and we were just kind of pumping people into it and raising more money and pumping more people into it. So I think that's
it's tough. When you're the founder, you're responsible for that net throughput. So it's a little bit, the metric depends, and this is I think important. It's got a good controllable input moves with your program's changes, okay, with your product changes. If you're the CEO, Tom, well, you're responsible for everything. If you're the marketing group, though, do you want to look at total users? No. You want to look at users that signed up, right? Because you're responsible for like buying ads and getting them in the front door through the sign up flow. If you're like the product leader is responsible for making the product work, then you want to look at retention. And then since both marketing and that product leader, both the CMO and the CPO report up to you, Tom, as the CEO, then you can say, okay, we got to get users from A to B. How much do I have to pay and how many engineers do I have to add? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think for me at that time, I was so focused on a chart that had a line going up and to the right that, I could control it by turning up the marketing spend, but that was like, empty calories.
Yeah. Well, that's about that retention game, right? If and we can certainly talk more about that. I think that there's real science in that. I think so. We've talked a little bit about this, right? Like, is it closely a good core controllable input is a metric that's closely connected to your top level business inputs, moves with your changes and only your changes, right? So it, not like when the marketing team does something. It's not a vanity metric, so it's not just something that like looks big, actually matters. Calculating it is as cheap as possible. So that's, and no cheaper. So that's like the chips actually cost you something. So you're not trying to look for free, you're trying to look for cheap. So NPS scores tend to be more expensive because you have to go do surveys. And so that's not optimal and they're slow. So it has to move quickly enough to control the business. If you've got a number that like moves really slowly, like you're looking at 365-day retention because you're assuming that the tax upload thing worked, you can't control the business. What are we going to do with the other 365 days? Ideally, you want to be able to come in every morning and see like what's happening. That's a gold standard and that's hard. So try to get to something that's 2 to 4 weeks, that type of thing, that helps. And then it can be calculated on different periods is another piece that's interesting. So businesses tend to have periodic effects, right? Users that come in at different levels, you got holiday effects, you've got, people going back to school, all that stuff. So being able to look at something on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and a quarterly basis, and an annual basis gives you a perspective of like, oh, I see where our business has trended over the past year, and enables you to correlate that with other effects too. And, so that's really meaningful. And the final thing, that I think you're pointing out is it goes up and to the right with success. It's actually really interesting. It is almost always worth it if you've got a number that's going, down to the right to create a flip for that, come up with a different way and like make it go up and to the right. It just, because think about what your problem was. You need to communicate to leaders succinctly, and leaders are like, they're looking, you're looking at 50 different charts. If everybody's going up and to the right, which is the nice convention, and you're going down to the right, you're going to get stepped on. So transform that number. Does that make sense?
I love it. Yeah, 100%. What's your view, Chris, on number of controllable inputs to measure? Is this a scorecard and there's a bunch of them, or is this a North Star thing?
It's. I think ideally it's a North Star one. Rarely do you get to that. And and I've seen it and teams that try to go from like, well, there's these actual sort of like 3 or 4 things that we really have to move, and they try to get to one. My very first team at Amazon, there was a lot of obsession when pizza teams were first created. This idea that a 2 pizza team was a group of engineers, a PM, and a dev manager that could all be fed with 2 pizzas. So it was a small sort of agile group, right? And the idea was each of them would be measured by a fitness function. And that would be one number. And it was mayhem. One of the engineers on the team actually wrote a patent on the fitness function that he created to measure all the things that were going on with the team. And it was a number that went up and to the right, and it was so complex you could not understand it. I mean, it's apparently patentable. That is not the way to do it, right? I mean, it looks nice in a dashboard because you look at everybody's numbers, they're going up and to the right, but it's not. It doesn't meet the other criteria, right? It doesn't, move quickly and with what your business is doing, and it can't like guide your team, and it doesn't help set the vision. So what you need is say 1 to 10, right? You need a small number that you can look at and understand relatively quickly when you look at them on a weekly or biweekly basis. That's it, There are a lot of people do things here like, oh, I'm going to show you my slide, and it's like a number going up and to the right. You can do that. I would really encourage you to just screenshot your dashboard that has the real number in it, right? So if you're looking at retention, show the real numbers and the graph, because then you don't have to try to figure out where's the number in the graph, right? And you don't have to do extra work to like re-represent it. Just come up with 1 to 10 sort of core controllable inputs. And if you can get to 1, that's ideal. That's great.
Yeah, I love it. Let's segue a little bit, Chris, into the AI PM stuff that you're working on. I would imagine that this AI advisor PM kind of assistant thing, it could help you with picking your controllable inputs, I presume.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it has like all the sort of knowledge that I put in there, and it's good. Like, you know, if you, so working with AI is sort of a function of, I think, 3 things in my experience. I've been doing this for a little while now. You know, one is the underlying knowledge and the prompting, like what is it told to do? Mm-hmm. Another piece is what you ask it to do. You know, like I want you to go do this. And the other thing is the information it has about what's going on, right? So if it has a lot of information about your business, if it has a good, clear request from you, and it knows how to do it, you're actually going to get really good results. So if you, and I would encourage anybody to try this, and you can, if you want to sign up for Product Partner, you can go to productpartner.ai and you can sign up, and we're onboarding people. But you can try this to some extent just with ChatGPT. 01 works even better than just the standard 4.0. But you can give it the business space you're in, and you can explain what a controllable input is and what you're looking for, and you can ask it to help you brainstorm some potential controllable inputs. And I would say one of the things that's also useful is ask it to help you find industries that have sort of similar metrics or similar control inputs. They're difficult to develop when you develop initially, right? Because you have to think through first, why does what you're working on matter to the company? If you can figure that out, right, that's going to help connect it to the top level. So that's a core question you should ask. Do you know why you matter to the company? If you can't say it like crisply, you're actually not ready, right, to develop that controllable input. And as a product leader, you need to know that, because that's going to connect to the customer. So you got to do it anyway. So once you figure that out, then you got to sort of go to where does that connect to the top line company metric? That'll help you back in, because we're sort of working backwards, right? We start with the problem and we go to the company metrics, and then figure out how to measure how what you do connects to that. Like, you know, we change this UI or we add this relevance algo, right? So in the case of ads, by changing the matching of supply to demand, we're going to move clicks. Okay, great. Can we measure the click rate? So click-through rate is a core ads metric. And if you ask the AI, it'll help you figure out, a lot of orgs would use click-through metrics. And then if you connect those two and you iterate, that can help you find it. But once you come up with this, you almost certainly won't get it right first. What you'll have to do is you'll have to watch it. You'll put this thing out there, you'll watch it for a couple of 4 to 8 weeks, and you'll say, is this moving when I change things? Is it moving randomly? Because if it's just noise, it's not helpful. You're going to freak out, right? And the number will go down and everybody will panic and it won't matter. And that's totally worse than not having anything. And then when you get to something that you understand what it moves, then try to go explain it. If you can explain it to somebody and they can understand it, now you can help lead your engineering team. Now you can help lead your organization. Now you can help lead your leaders. So work backwards from the customer and the business, connecting in, and the AI will help you do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. I think a lot of people might have listened to this and thought, okay, I'm going to think really hard about what should be my metric, and then I'm good to go. But I think what you're saying is you kind of have to test drive it a little bit.
Yeah. It's just like product management, right, Tom? I mean, you have an idea of what you think the customer needs. You think it works. You put it out there. If you don't go and check, and then go figure out it worked for some, it didn't work for others. Why didn't it work for others? Right? You're not doing your job. The same thing is true for these. Who's the customer? You've got your engineering team, you got your senior leadership. You got to go check. Is it working for them? Is it? And if it's not working for those customers, and you're a customer, it's not working for you. You got to go back and iterate.
So, Chris, tell us a little more about the product partner stuff. Like, what's the vision for what you're building there?
So the vision here is that the job of product management is difficult, I think it's the hardest of all the jobs, honestly. I've done a bunch of them. I think it's the hardest job because it's a lot of influence without authority, but it's also very broad, right? You have to figure out what does the customer need. You have to materialize that. You work with design. You try to work with engineering to make it concrete. You try to get it out the door and work through the execution piece to handle the launch. You got to measure the business. These jobs are very broad. A lot of people are learning them as they go. Some people are real experts in this, and they've, like you've done this for many years, so you've learned how to do all this stuff, but it takes a while to learn it and develop it, and to develop the playbook to say, okay, this is what I do next, and this is what a good one of these looks like. So as a leader, for example, I saw a lot of relatively junior people, whether they were dev managers or product people, coming in and writing goals that weren't concrete. If you don't have a goal that you're going to take that's not concrete, how do you know you're going to be successful? How do people know what you're going to do, right? How do you lead by saying this is where we're going without a concrete goal? So you have to look at these pieces: product requirements, your mission and charter, the user stories that come out of those requirements, the goals that you're taking to ship that software. And you got to look at all that and make it high quality, because if you do that, then the process is much more smooth. The data that I've read seems to indicate that over 50% of PMs say that they are overwhelmed and they don't have time to do the things that they think they need to do. And this is a tool that helps remove some of that toil. It will create a comprehensive set of user stories out of your PRD for you. And just like one step, it does a good job. And it knows how to do this well because of the sort of expertise that I built in. So it's still early days, but I think the intent is to have it really be a teammate. And that's sort of the difference between that and like the traditional tools that you might have seen, which are form-based, right? They make work for product leaders, and product leaders have no time. They're all overworked, right? And so you need to save people time and help get better work done.
Chris, I'm curious. I recently did a post a few business days ago about what I thought was going to happen to the product management profession.
Yeah.
Because of AI. I'm curious to get your read. Like, what do you see as some potential scenarios for how, someone coming up earlier in their PM career who's in the business now, like what's it going to look like for them 5-10 years out?
It's a great question. And we're all just guessing. Things are changing so rapidly. I will tell you what my guess is. My guess is that there will be fewer PMs that are more highly leveraged, and there will be far fewer engineers. So I'm much more worried at the moment. I'd be much more worried if I was an engineer, because of the quality of the tools that are emerging and how fast they're emerging. As a product leader, what I think is going to happen is that there will be a connection. Right now, we're doing a lot of our work. We write spreadsheets and we write documents. We talk to people. We have meetings and decks and we talk. Over time, you're going to be using things like Product Partner to do your core workflow much more rapidly. Okay, this is sort of the requirements. These are user stories, and it's going to get built out. And already people are using AI for some of these things. Tying it all together makes it better. But the next step is where tools that are coming on board now are looking at customer relationship management software. They're looking at analytics, and they're going to help you identify the trends and the needs of customers much more rapidly. So you don't have to go surf through all those tickets, and you don't have to ingest all those customer feedback requests. And it will do better clusterization and organization of that. That will come in. So that'll save you time and give you more insight. And then rapid prototyping tools will also come on board. Things like already Bolt.new just announced like $100 million raise, I think. Bolt.new is a really fun tool that you can try. You just type in a prompt and it stands up a full working React app in your browser. Sort of like a mind-blowing experience. These tools are going to enable very rapid prototyping and very rapid iteration with customers for PMs, such that you'll be able to better understand what the customer needs, get from like need to requirement to prototype on your own very rapidly, and then integrate with a much more highly skilled engineering team to integrate with more sophisticated systems. So I think there will be fewer PMs, but they will be more highly leveraged. And I think the amount of insight, judgment, and skill that a PM needs will be up leveled, right? You'll be able to do basic things, but some PMs right now are sort of doing project management and helping move data along. That's not where, if that's where you are, you should spend time learning more about how to think meaningfully about what does the customer really need and how to get that data, because just moving your software along will increasingly be done by the machines.
Yeah, I wonder for younger PMs, we benefited when we were coming up by being able to do lots of releases and work on lots of teams and kind of learn a little bit through osmosis and see how our kind of managers and execs were making decisions. And now it feels like we're compressing that time for the earlier career PMs, where it's like, oh, we don't need you to do a lot of the grunt work anymore. So to add value, you've got to up level, but you're not going to have as much cockpit hours like working through these things.
Yeah.
It's I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but
I'm not sure how it will happen either. I think if I was to offer advice to upcoming PMs, I think it'd be the advice I'd offer myself even now, which is to find a good mentor, find somebody that's done this job, and like pick their brain and just constantly ask for their playbook. And honestly, I've seen this work really well for even senior executives. You go to work for like an SVP. If you can figure out what their playbook is and what they would do in a situation, what would you do? Right? My buddy Brian Marsh is an engineering director at Google, does this brilliantly. He almost never answers a question that one of his employees ask him. He always says, well, what do you think we should do? Doesn't give him any optionality. If somebody's like, I think we should jump off this, the bridge, you'd be like, maybe not today. But what you get out of that is you get like all this insight. So asking, well, what do you think we should do? What could you do? What have you done in the past? You get all this insight about this other playbook, and then you're sort of aligned with their approach and you're learning. So I would say if you can find a good mentor. So if you're joining, say, you can do it. You can join a startup. You don't have to join a big company. If you join a startup that's got let's say you started your next startup, Tom. If you're a new PM, you should join Tom's next startup, right? Because Tom will tell you, this is what I would do. And it's great. That's really useful.
Yeah.
Also, I would say there's a tremendous amount of information out there now that wasn't here before, like things on Reforged and on Maven and, various books that are out there. There's mine, but there's a bunch of others. This stuff didn't exist. And there's courses, right? HBS teaches courses, and Stern teaches courses. And actually there's a bunch of PMs coming out. So it's a very different ecosystem than it was when you and I came up and we were figuring out what is this job? Now I think it's more well understood, but it's still very, very variable.
Love it. Yeah, it's fascinating to the extent that when we were doing it, it was kind of like an apprentice job where you learn from more senior people. Now there's all this content available. And then maybe the third phase is now, if you're the equivalent of an APM, you're going to be expected to contribute in ways that are way more value added than in the past, because they're just going to expect you to use AI to do a lot of the basics now.
Yeah. So, and I think to that point, the two most essential things that you do there are, one, talk to customers, get the real customer data, and two, proofread what the AI gives you. Because, we're not at the place yet. I'm seeing this pattern, honestly, and I've been hearing reports from my colleagues that PMs are generating things out of AI and they're not reviewing it. And it's self-evident, and those people are not going to last long, because you can't trick people anymore. There was maybe a small period where you could trick your bosses and they were just like, wow, look at all this. Not anymore.
I worry. I think we're lucky in that when we get an AI output that's 80% right, I think we're pretty good at capturing the 20% that oh no, that's actually wrong, or it's missing some key thing here. Now, but if you've never done it the old way, and if you're in college now, and you've never even worked before, it's going to be like that new driver that's never had to do change gears. They're like, I don't know, I press a button and the car moves. They don't really know how it works. So that'll be an interesting challenge for because we'll have to develop that ability to teach people how to have a mastery of the profession without having to get under the hood the way we did.
Yeah.
Because so much of it will be automated away.
I tend to think, Tom, that that some of this will actually be solved by the AI. So Ethan Mollick wrote this book called Co-Intelligence. It's a great book, easy approachable book. And he says, first thing you have to understand about AI is that this is the worst AI you will ever use, which like we all know, but it's actually a meaningful perspective if you take it.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, so today it's giving me some trash over here. But then when you have the experience of, well, I used an optimized system that had a bunch of specific, like, this is how you write a PRD. Chat PRD claims like 20,000 users right now. That's a sign that like people are finding that when you build something that can do that, you know, it will guide you to better results. So building the expertise in when people in verticals come in is powerful. And I think that people have been talking about prompt engineering as if it was an engineering job. What it is really is it's a deep expertise in writing job. And so as people that are experts in the space, whether they're product experts or, you know, design experts or engineering experts, are applying their knowledge and putting that in there, that's going to help you guide. These tools and these AIs will actually be able to teach you and help you work through and ask the right questions and make suggestions. Do you use the research? What did the users tell you? How many users did you talk to? These are all meaningful.
Last question before we wrap, Chris. Yeah. Do you think the total number of people in the product management title will be more or less 10 years from now? Not per company, but in total.
Boy, that's a really, you know, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I mean, I think some of the numbers I've seen are like, there's about 900,000 product leaders right now.
Yeah.
I believe it's maybe reasonable. I think that these companies are all growing, small companies, big companies. There's a lot of need for this stuff. I think the job in some ways gets harder. It also gets more accessible. There's more need for this role as there's less need as prototyping and engineering goes faster, right? You sort of have the experience of it was like 1 PM to like 6 to 12 engineers kind of thing, right? And so if you have fewer engineers, like maybe you need fewer PMs, but also maybe a more effective PM can work across more engineers. This is all a long story to say, I don't know, maybe fewer.
Yeah, I think fewer for the reasons you described. And I think your framing that you're referencing of what we're seeing now is the worst AI we're ever going to see is exciting and scary at the same time.
Right.
And I would imagine like today's PMs will need to climb up the ladder, climb up the stack and do more than PM. They may have to do marketing, sales, product success, strategy, because you're not going to need these ultra functional stovepipe specialists anymore.
I agree. And I will leave it on a positive note, which is I think it'll actually also be more fun.
Yes.
And more creative, right? Less like, hopefully, less getting up in the middle of the night because there's somebody's pager going off and they don't like know how to handle it, or less like weird escalations to your VP type of thing, right? People be able to get their own information and less project management. I think it'll be more fun.
I agree. I think those who like to think big and think across various lenses and pull it all together in like a big way, I think are going to have a lot of impact. And I also think there's going to be more companies.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah. There's
more smaller companies. And honestly, smaller companies are more efficient. There's a great NFX just wrote a cool article on their 3-person unicorn. They think there'll be more 3-person unicorns.
Yeah.
And I love that idea, because like small companies can do more and more now. And like you have more trust, higher quality communication. And the more a company grows, the more crosstalk and packet loss there is, and its efficiency goes down. It creates strength and defensibility with that mass, but its efficiency just goes down. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just the nature of things.
Yeah. It reminds me of like studies of the steel industry where, there used to be like a few gigantic steel mills, and then they came up with these mini mills that were way more efficient. And that's just kind of like the way it often works.
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly where it's going to go. And I think that's also good for us as product leaders, because, it's communicating and tying everybody together is a critical role, but it's not the one that matters the most to the user.
That's a very good point. Well, people should connect with you. Where do you publish your thoughts on Substack or LinkedIn, or where
I
you?
don't right now. I'm just on LinkedIn. You can reach out and
Okay.
connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Chris Vander Mey. You can also just see Vander Mey on LinkedIn. You can also email me if you've got thoughts or questions. Chris at productpartner.ai. And happy to connect.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Chris, and I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thanks so much, Tom. It was great to chat. Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That was Chris. He and I, as I mentioned at the beginning, like we go back, oh, Shiza, when the hell? Like probably 2006 in Google. Very early days when Sundar was, I don't know what his title was, but I think he was just working on, not just, but I think he was working on Chrome, maybe? I don't know. But kudos to Sundar, and exciting to hear Chris's story, given that he's been at some iconic places. I thought the comparison of Google, Facebook, and Amazon was pretty interesting as well. And the controllable inputs one, I think that Frito-Lay example is so cool. Like that is the exact amount. You want kind of one stale bag, and ideally you want that one stale bag to have been on the shelf for just enough to get stale. The number of recently made stale bags. So that was super cool. And then fun talking about the future of PM in the world of AI. If you haven't seen my post about that, just go on my Substack, firesidepm.substack.com, right down there. And follow me on LinkedIn. Last thing is Chris mentioned people are learning a lot on Maven. I have a cohort that's starting in a few weeks, which I'm pretty excited about, this cohort approach where, you know, I had done stuff on Maven before, which is kind of traditional, like, hey, here's some expertise. I'm going to help you master your next product review. And I'll still do those from time to time. If you want me to do another cohort for those, just let me know. Like, this is the most popular one. But as you can tell, I'm a little more excited about this one because this is, rather than me kind of lecturing at you, it's a small group of PMs who, sharing the wrong screen. It's a small group of PMs who, no, that's again the wrong screen. Here it is. It's a 3-month cohort where probably about 5 or 6 PMs in the tech industry, we meet once a week, and it's a safe space. They usually come from a broad variety of companies. There's some FANG people, some startup people, some people in between jobs, but they all have tech product management experience. And we start out kind of going over a little bit of a retrospective on our careers. Where have we succeeded? Where have we struggled? Then we talk about like recent kind of big lessons learned. Then we get into like, what do we think makes for a great PM? What are the competencies that we think are most important, that we've struggled with, that we think we want the most kind of advice about? And that's where I can kind of weigh in and give you a perspective based on, decades of experience in the industry. And then we go into goal setting and basically treating your career like a product. So what are your OKRs? What are your controllable inputs? And then what's the roadmap for achieving success across what categories? And then how do we break that down into quarterly goals? So if that's of interest to you, you can check it out on maven.com/Tom L. And that one, you got to apply because I want to make sure that people are, all in the tech industry in product management roles or have some product management experience. I usually get back to people, the applications on a rolling basis. And there's still time to enroll. I think that the next one starts Feb 27. So in a few weeks. So it's a good time to register if you're up for it. And then if you're like, hey, I don't want to do the cohort thing. I just want to pick your brain about a job offer I'm getting, or a perf review I'm trying to process, or a promo I'm going for, or a big hard product decision I'm trying to make. You can also hit me up for one-on-one advice through tomleungcoaching.com. All right. With that, thanks everybody for checking out this episode. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Let's get back to work.